For years, fans have watched Shedeur Sanders and Deion Sanders make headlines together, but this latest revelation may have changed the entire conversation. What many people believed was simply another luxury purchase by Coach Prime has suddenly become something much bigger. A stunning beachfront estate in St. Croix, valued at more than $5 million, was originally seen as a dream vacation home for one of football's biggest personalities. But according to Shedeur himself, that version of the story wasn't the full picture. One statement completely flipped the narrative, leaving fans wondering whether they had misunderstood the purchase from the very beginning. The biggest surprise wasn't the location, the breathtaking ocean views, or even the multi-million-dollar price tag. It was the confirmation that Shedeur wasn't just visiting the property, he reportedly owns half of it. Instead of Deion Sanders buying the Caribbean mansion on his own, Shedeur revealed that they split the purchase evenly, with each taking a 50% stake. That single detail transformed what looked like a father's extravagant purchase into something that appeared far more strategic. Suddenly, the conversation shifted from luxury real estate to one of the most fascinating financial stories surrounding any NFL rookie. Naturally, that revelation sparked one question across social media almost immediately. How does a quarterback who hasn't even completed a full NFL season become part owner of a beachfront estate worth more than $5 million? At first glance, the numbers simply don't seem to add up. Even with an NFL contract, most rookies spend years building enough financial security before making investments on this scale. So how could Shedeur already be in a position to make a move that many veteran athletes would think twice about? The answer, however, has almost nothing to do with the paycheck he'll receive from the Cleveland Browns. In fact, focusing only on his football salary may be the biggest mistake anyone can make when trying to understand this story. Reports and publicly known business partnerships paint a much different picture, one where endorsements, licensing agreements, and a rapidly growing personal brand may have become just as valuable as anything happening on the football field. That's why this story isn't really about a mansion at all. It's about how the business of sports is changing and why Shedeur Sanders may already be operating under a completely different financial playbook than most young athletes. But before breaking down where that money reportedly comes from, there's another piece of the puzzle that makes this story even more interesting. Because months before anyone knew about this Caribbean investment, Coach Prime casually made a comment that barely attracted any attention. At the time, it sounded like nothing more than a proud father talking about future plans. Looking back now, though, many believe it was the first clue that this deal had already begun taking shape. And once you connect that moment to what Shedeur recently confirmed, the entire timeline starts to make a lot more sense. The story took a dramatic turn when details began emerging directly from the Sanders family instead of anonymous social media accounts or online speculation. During a conversation featured on one of the family's YouTube videos, Shedeur Sanders explained that the stunning beachfront property in St. Croix wasn't solely his father's purchase. According to Shedeur, he and Deion Sanders each contributed to the acquisition, splitting the ownership evenly. Coach Prime was right there during the conversation and appeared to confirm the arrangement, giving the claim far more credibility than the countless rumors that had been circulating online. That confirmation immediately changed the way fans viewed the mansion. For weeks, many had assumed it was simply another example of Deion Sanders rewarding himself after years of success as an NFL legend, Hall of Famer, and college coach. Others believed it was a luxury vacation home that reflected the lifestyle Coach Prime has built over decades in sports and business. But learning that Shedeur reportedly owns half of the property introduced an entirely different perspective. Instead of a father making a flashy purchase alone, it suddenly looked like two generations of the Sanders family making a significant investment together. The timing of the revelation made it even more intriguing. By the time Shedeur discussed the ownership split, the mansion had already attracted attention because of its incredible location, oceanfront views, and multi-million-dollar value. Fans had admired the property, but few questioned how it was actually purchased. Once the ownership details became public, however, the focus shifted away from the mansion itself and toward the financial strategy behind it. Social media quickly filled with debates, with many people wondering whether this represented one of the smartest investment moves by a young professional athlete. What made the story stand out even more was that it wasn't based on an unnamed source or an internet leak. The information came from Shedeur himself, with Deion reinforcing the explanation during the same discussion. In today's sports world, where rumors often spread long before facts are verified, hearing the details directly from those involved gave fans a reason to pay closer attention. While people could still debate the financial implications, the central point, that Shedeur was part of the purchase, was no longer just online speculation. The revelation also prompted a completely different conversation about Shedeur's career. Until then, most discussions surrounding him centered on football, his development as a quarterback, his opportunity with the Cleveland Browns, and the expectations that come with carrying one of the most recognizable last names in the sport. But now, people were talking about business decisions, long-term investments, and wealth building. It was a reminder that modern athletes are often building financial portfolios long before reaching the peak of their playing careers. Still, the confirmation raised an even bigger mystery than it solved. Owning half of a property valued at more than $5 million is a massive commitment for anyone, especially a rookie entering the NFL. Fans immediately started asking where the funding came from and whether football alone could explain such a move. The numbers didn't appear to tell the whole story, and that's exactly where this becomes far more interesting. Because once you look beyond the purchase itself, another detail about the agreement completely changes how this investment should be viewed. At first, many people assumed the arrangement was as simple as splitting the purchase price down the middle and sharing every expense that came afterward. But as more details surfaced, it became clear that the reported agreement was far more structured than most fans realized. According to Shedeur's explanation during the family discussion, the 50-50 split applied to the acquisition of the property itself. However, he also indicated that future upgrades and additions planned by Deion Sanders would not automatically become his responsibility. That distinction may seem minor at first glance, but it completely changes how the investment can be understood. Think about it from a business perspective. A vacation home worth more than $5 million isn't just another piece of real estate. It comes with maintenance costs, renovations, landscaping, taxes, insurance, and countless other expenses over time. If every future project had been divided equally, the financial commitment would continue growing year after year. But reports surrounding the conversation suggested that any major additions Coach Prime wanted to make, including his widely discussed idea of adding a private football training area near the property, would fall under his own financial responsibility rather than being shared equally. While those specific plans have been talked about publicly, it's important to note that not every proposed addition has been officially completed or confirmed. That detail tells a much bigger story than many people initially noticed. Instead of what looked like an emotional father and son purchase with vague expectations, the arrangement appears to reflect a carefully considered investment between two individuals who understood exactly what each person was responsible for. Whether the property becomes a family retreat, a long-term investment, or both, the reported structure suggests clear financial boundaries rather than an open-ended commitment. It's the kind of planning often associated with experienced investors, not something people typically expect from a rookie entering his first NFL season. What's even more interesting is that this wasn't a decision that appeared overnight. Months before news of the property became public, Deion Sanders casually mentioned during a media session that he and Shedeur had been exploring the idea of purchasing real estate together. At the time, the comment didn't generate major headlines. Most people interpreted it as a father talking about future dreams with his son. Looking back now, though, that brief remark seems far more significant. It suggests that the idea had been developing well before anyone knew about the St. Croix estate, meaning this wasn't a spontaneous luxury purchase, but potentially part of a much longer financial strategy. That timeline changes the entire story as viewed. Instead of imagining Shedeur suddenly deciding to spend millions after signing with the Browns, it appears that this investment may have been discussed and planned long before he ever took an NFL snap. If that's the case, then the mansion isn't simply a reward for reaching the league. It represents another step in a broader approach to building wealth, one that Coach Prime has often encouraged throughout his coaching career and public appearances. He's frequently spoken about ownership, investing, and creating opportunities that last beyond football, and this reported purchase fits neatly within that philosophy. Of course, one enormous question still remained unanswered. Even with a well-planned agreement and clearly defined responsibilities, half of a $5.15 million property still represents an investment of more than $2.5 million. For most NFL rookies, that kind of commitment would seem almost impossible so early in their careers. So if Shedeur's Browns contract wasn't enough to comfortably explain the purchase, where exactly did the money come from? That's where the numbers become far more surprising and where the story shifts away from football contracts and into the rapidly growing business empire Shedeur Sanders has built around his name. The deeper you look into this story, the more one fact stands out. Shedeur Sanders' NFL contract alone doesn't fully explain this level of purchasing power. That's where many people immediately get the story wrong. The moment news broke that he reportedly owned half of a $5.15 million Caribbean estate, countless fans assumed the Cleveland Browns had handed him a massive rookie deal. But that's simply not how NFL rookie contracts work, especially for a player selected outside the first round. While Shedeur is certainly earning a life-changing salary compared to the average person, it's nowhere near the kind of income people typically associate with buying multi-million-dollar luxury properties so early in a professional career. When you break down the numbers, the gap becomes even clearer. A reported 50% share of the St. Croix property would represent an investment of roughly $2.5 million before considering closing costs, taxes, insurance, travel expenses, and any future maintenance. That's an enormous financial commitment for anyone, let alone a rookie preparing for his first NFL season. So naturally, people began asking whether there was another source of income hiding behind the headlines. The answer appears to be yes, and that's what makes this story so fascinating. Long before Shedeur ever threw an NFL pass, he had already become one of the most recognizable athletes in college football. Thanks to the rise of name, image, and likeness opportunities, better known as NIL, he wasn't waiting until Sundays to build wealth. Instead, he was building a personal brand that attracted some of the biggest companies in sports. While many college athletes earned respectable endorsement deals, Shedeur quickly positioned himself in an entirely different category, turning his popularity into a business that extended far beyond the football field. That strategy didn't happen accidentally. Growing up under the guidance of Deion Sanders meant learning that your value isn't limited to your performance between the lines. Coach Prime has spent decades proving that athletes can become brands, entrepreneurs, and investors while they're still competing. Shedeur appeared to embrace that philosophy from the very beginning. Every appearance, every interview, every social media post, and every partnership helped expand his public profile. By the time he entered the NFL, he wasn't arriving as just another rookie quarterback. He had already carrying one of the strongest personal brands in football. It's also important to separate confirmed information from online speculation. Over the past year, reports circulated claiming that Shedeur generated extraordinary income through NFL-related licensing and merchandise. Some social media posts simplified those reports by saying he made tens of millions of dollars from jersey sales alone. However, later explanations suggested the figure represented broader licensing revenue rather than jersey purchases by themselves. Regardless of the exact breakdown, one thing became increasingly clear. Football salary was only one piece of his overall financial picture. His earning power had expanded well beyond the standard rookie paycheck. And that's exactly why the mansion story caught so many people off guard. Fans were trying to explain a multi-million-dollar investment using only the numbers from an NFL contract, while overlooking the business empire Shedeur had been quietly building for years. Once those additional revenue streams are taken into account, the purchase begins to look far less surprising. In fact, it starts to resemble the kind of calculated investment someone with multiple income sources might make, rather than an impulsive luxury purchase. But if his Browns contract isn't the primary reason he could reportedly afford such a major investment, then where is the bulk of his wealth actually coming from? That's where the story takes another unexpected turn. Because when you add together his endorsement portfolio, licensing opportunities, and the power of his rapidly growing brand, you begin to see that Shedeur Sanders may already be operating on a financial level that very few rookie athletes have ever reached. If there's one thing this story proves, it's that Shedeur Sanders isn't relying on football alone to build his future. Long before he arrived in the NFL, he had already established himself as one of the most marketable young athletes in America. While many rookies enter the league hoping their first professional contract will finally open the door to endorsement opportunities, Shedeur walked into the NFL with an impressive portfolio of brand partnerships already in place. That difference is exactly what separates him from the traditional rookie financial model.
One of the biggest reasons is the personal brand he spent years developing. Playing under the spotlight of Coach Prime naturally brought attention, but attention alone doesn't create lasting business opportunities. Shedeur consistently built an image that appealed to both fans and major companies. His confidence, polished media presence, growing social media audience, and ability to stay relevant throughout his college career made him one of the most recognizable faces in football, even before hearing his name called on draft day. In today's sports world, visibility can be just as valuable as statistics, and Shedeur understood that earlier than most athletes. That visibility quickly translated into partnerships with globally recognized brands. Nike became one of his most notable sponsors, aligning him with one of the largest sportswear companies in the world. He also secured a partnership with Gatorade, joining a select group of athletes trusted to represent one of the biggest names in sports performance. Those aren't the types of endorsement deals typically handed to average rookies. Companies invest in athletes they believe can influence culture, sell products, and remain relevant for years to come. And Shedeur had already demonstrated that potential long before reaching the professional level. Then came the report that truly changed the conversation. It was widely reported that Shedeur earned a record-breaking $17.7 million through the NFL Players Association's group licensing program, an unprecedented figure for a rookie. The number immediately exploded across social media, with many people claiming it was entirely generated through jersey sales. That version of the story spread incredibly fast because it sounded almost unbelievable. But as more information became available, Deion Sanders clarified that the payment wasn't simply the result of jerseys flying off store shelves. Instead, it reportedly reflected a much broader licensing agreement that included merchandise, marketing rights, and other commercial uses of Shedeur's name, image, and likeness. Even with that clarification, the headline figure remained remarkable and highlighted just how valuable his brand had already become. When you step back and look at the complete picture, the numbers begin to make much more sense. Instead of depending on a single paycheck from the Browns, Shedeur appears to have multiple streams of income working simultaneously. NFL salary, endorsement contracts, licensing revenue, advertising campaigns, appearances, and other commercial opportunities all contribute to his overall earning power. That's exactly how many of today's highest-paid athletes build wealth. The game itself provides one source of income, but the business surrounding the athlete often becomes even more valuable. Perhaps the most impressive part is how early all of this happened. Many NFL stars don't begin attracting major national endorsements until they've established themselves over several seasons. Shedeur managed to build much of that foundation before completing his first professional campaign. Whether people admire his confidence or criticize the attention he receives, there's little doubt that he has successfully turned his name into a business. That's a skill that extends far beyond throwing touchdowns and may ultimately prove just as important as anything he accomplishes on the field. This is also where Coach Prime's influence becomes impossible to ignore. For years, Deion Sanders has emphasized that athletes should think beyond contracts and focus on ownership, branding, and long-term financial freedom. Watching Shedeur secure high-profile partnerships and reportedly generate significant licensing income suggests those lessons weren't just speeches, they became part of a larger blueprint. Rather than waiting for football to make him wealthy, Shedeur appears to have positioned himself so that football and business grow together. And once you understand how powerful that business model has become, the Caribbean mansion starts looking like just one chapter in a much larger story. Because the real advantage isn't simply having enough money to buy luxury property, it's having enough financial independence to approach every career decision from a position of strength. That's where this story becomes about much more than endorsements or real estate, and it raises an even bigger question about what Shedeur's future in the NFL could look like. The more you examine Shedeur Sanders' financial position, the more you realize this story extends far beyond luxury real estate or endorsement deals. If the reported figures surrounding his business ventures are even close to accurate, then his career may unfold very differently from that of the average NFL rookie. Most young players enter the league knowing that every practice, every preseason game, and every contract negotiation could shape their financial future. For many, football is the primary path to long-term security. Shedeur's situation appears to be different because his earning potential already stretches well beyond the field. That kind of financial independence can have a major impact on the way an athlete approaches the game. A player whose future depends entirely on one contract may feel pressure to rush back from injuries, accept unfavorable terms, or make career decisions purely based on financial necessity. Someone with multiple successful income streams, however, has far more flexibility. It doesn't mean football becomes less important. It means the pressure surrounding every decision can be different. Instead of thinking only about the next paycheck, that player can focus on long-term success, personal development, and choosing opportunities that align with bigger career goals.
It also changes the way contract negotiations might unfold in the future. Most players dream of reaching that second NFL contract because it's often where the biggest money is earned. By that stage, many have spent years proving themselves while hoping to secure financial stability for life. If Shedeur continues building his off-field business while also developing as a quarterback, he could eventually approach those negotiations from a stronger position than many of his peers. Rather than feeling forced to accept the first available offer, he may have the freedom to evaluate what truly benefits his career. Of course, every negotiation depends on performance, team needs, and market conditions, but financial flexibility can provide options that not every player enjoys. There's another advantage that often goes unnoticed. Financial confidence can sometimes translate into mental confidence. Football is already one of the most demanding sports in the world, with constant scrutiny from coaches, fans, analysts, and the media. Every interception becomes a headline. Every difficult game sparks debate about whether a quarterback belongs in the starting lineup. That's an environment capable of wearing down even experienced veterans. If an athlete knows their financial future isn't hanging on every single performance, it may become easier to block out outside noise and focus on improving week after week. That doesn't mean success is guaranteed. Money doesn't throw accurate passes, read defenses, or win football games. Shedeur will still have to earn every opportunity on the field, just like every other quarterback in the league. The NFL has humbled countless highly paid athletes over the years, and no endorsement contract can replace consistent performance between the lines. Coaches care about production, teammates care about leadership, and fans ultimately judge quarterbacks by victories. Those expectations won't disappear simply because someone has built an impressive business portfolio. Even so, it's difficult to ignore how unusual Shedeur's situation appears compared to the traditional rookie experience. Most young players spend their first few seasons trying to establish themselves while gradually building financial security. Shedeur seems to have entered the league with much of that foundation already in place. Whether it's endorsement partnerships, licensing revenue, or investments outside football, his approach reflects a broader vision that reaches far beyond the next game on the schedule.
Instead of waiting until retirement to think about wealth, he's reportedly making those decisions while his professional career is only beginning. Perhaps that's the biggest reason this story has attracted so much attention. Fans initially believed they were discussing a Caribbean mansion, but the conversation quickly evolved into something much larger. It became a discussion about how the next generation of athletes is changing the definition of success. Playing at the highest level is still the ultimate goal, but today's biggest stars increasingly understand that their value extends beyond touchdowns, statistics, and championship rings. Their names have become businesses, and those businesses can continue growing regardless of what happens on the scoreboard. But none of this happened overnight. The foundation for this strategy may have been laid years before Shedeur ever entered the NFL. In fact, if you look closely at the lessons Coach Prime has shared throughout his coaching career, this entire approach starts to make perfect sense. And that's what makes the final piece of this story perhaps the most revealing of all. When people talk about Deion Sanders, the conversation usually starts with football. They mention the Hall of Fame career, the unforgettable confidence, the championships, and now his success as one of college football's most recognizable coaches. But anyone who has followed Coach Prime closely knows that his message has rarely been limited to what happens on the field. For years, he's been telling young athletes that talent alone isn't enough. Football careers eventually end, but ownership, smart investments, and personal branding can create opportunities that last for generations. Looking at Shedeur's reported business decisions today, many fans believe they're seeing those lessons play out in real time. Throughout his coaching career, Deion has repeatedly encouraged his players to think like entrepreneurs instead of simply employees. Whether speaking in team meetings, press conferences, or interviews, he's often emphasized creating multiple streams of income rather than depending on a single paycheck. His philosophy has been simple. Your athletic ability may open the first door, but your decisions away from the game determine how long success lasts. That message has become one of the defining themes of the Coach Prime era, and it's something Shedeur appears to have embraced from an early age. It's easy to forget that Shedeur has grown up watching one of the most successful athlete brand transformations in sports history. Deion Sanders didn't build his reputation through football alone. Over the decades, he became a broadcaster, businessman, coach, public speaker, and media personality while maintaining one of the strongest personal brands in American sports. Watching that journey firsthand likely gave Shedeur a completely different perspective on what a professional athlete could become. Instead of seeing football as the finish line, he appears to have viewed it as the foundation for something much larger.
That perspective may explain why so many of Shedeur's moves seem carefully planned rather than spontaneous. His endorsement partnerships didn't appear overnight. His growing social media presence wasn't built by accident. Even the reported investment in the St. Croix property fits a pattern of thinking beyond immediate rewards. Rather than spending money simply to display wealth, the purchase has been interpreted by many fans as another example of building long-term assets. While only the Sanders family knows every detail behind the decision, the overall strategy seems remarkably consistent with the lessons Coach Prime has preached for years. Another interesting aspect of Deion's approach is his focus on financial education. He's often spoken about avoiding short-term thinking and preparing for life after sports, reminding players that professional careers can change in an instant. Injuries, coaching changes, roster moves, or unexpected setbacks can alter any athlete's future. Building investments, business partnerships, and valuable personal brands creates stability that doesn't disappear when the final whistle blows. Looking at Shedeur's growing portfolio of endorsements and reported investments, it's easy to see why many observers believe he's following that blueprint almost step by step. Of course, none of this guarantees that every business decision will succeed. Investments carry risk, endorsement opportunities can change, and even the strongest brands require constant work to remain relevant. Success in business, just like success in football, demands discipline, smart decision-making, and the ability to adapt. Shedeur still has a long NFL career ahead of him, and his reputation will continue to depend largely on what he accomplishes on the field. but having multiple opportunities beyond football gives him a foundation that many players spent years trying to build. Perhaps that's the most remarkable part of this entire story. While fans were debating the value of a beachfront mansion, the bigger lesson may have been hiding in plain sight. This wasn't just about luxury real estate or impressive endorsement deals. It was about a father teaching his son how to think differently about success. Instead of measuring achievement by the size of a contract alone, the Sanders family appears to be focused on creating lasting wealth through ownership, branding, and strategic investments. Whether people agree with every move or not, it's a philosophy that has undeniably captured attention across the sports world. And that's why this conversation refuses to fade away. The mansion was only the headline. The real story is how Shedeur Sanders has become one of the most talked about young athletes, not just because of his arm talent, but because of the business empire taking shape alongside his football career. As he begins writing the next chapter with the Cleveland Browns, one thing is becoming increasingly clear. Every decision he makes, on or off the field, will be watched through a completely different lens than that of the average rookie. The timing of this story is one of the biggest reasons it has exploded across the sports world. If news of the St. Croix property had surfaced a year earlier, it probably would have been viewed as another headline about Coach Prime enjoying the rewards of an incredible career. But everything changed once Shedeur officially entered the NFL. Suddenly, fans weren't just looking at the mansion, they were looking at the future of one of the league's most talked-about rookie quarterbacks. Every new detail became part of a much larger discussion about his career, his business success, and the expectations that come with carrying the Sanders name. Social media only amplified that conversation. Within hours of clips from the family discussions circulating online, thousands of fans began sharing their own opinions. Some praised Shedeur for thinking beyond football at such a young age, calling him one of the smartest financial minds among today's athletes. Others argued that building wealth with investments while still beginning an NFL career showed maturity that many players don't develop until much later. To those supporters, the reported property purchase wasn't about showing off, it was about making long-term decisions that could benefit him for decades. At the same time, not everyone viewed the story the same way. Some critics questioned whether the attention surrounding the purchase had become bigger than Shedeur's football achievements. Others debated how much of his financial success was driven by his own growing brand versus the influence of having Deion Sanders as his father. Those conversations continue across sports media and online platforms, but they're ultimately matters of opinion rather than established fact. Regardless of where people stand, one thing is undeniable. Shedeur has become one of the most closely watched young athletes in professional sports. That's exactly why nearly every move he makes generates headlines. Whether he's signing a new endorsement, speaking at a press conference, posting on social media, or making an investment away from football, fans and analysts pay attention. Very few rookie quarterbacks receive that level of interest before proving themselves in the NFL. For Shedeur, however, the spotlight has followed him for years. Playing under Coach Prime at Jackson State in Colorado helped build that visibility, but it also created expectations that continue to grow with every new chapter of his career.
Another reason this story resonates is because it reflects how much professional sports have changed. Years ago, most athletes relied almost entirely on team contracts to build wealth. Today, the landscape looks completely different. NIL opportunities, social media influence, licensing agreements, and global endorsement deals allow elite athletes to create successful businesses long before reaching the professional level. Shedeur has become one of the clearest examples of that shift, and whether people admire it or question it, many agree that he's helping redefine what a modern athlete can accomplish financially. For Browns fans, the discussion goes beyond money. They want to know whether all of this off-field success will translate into confidence and leadership on Sundays. Supporters argue that financial security allows a quarterback to focus entirely on football without worrying about future contracts or outside pressure. Critics counter that none of those business achievements matter unless he performs when the games begin. Only time will answer that debate, but it's another reason this story continues to generate so much attention. In many ways, the mansion has become a symbol rather than the main story. It's no longer just a beautiful piece of Caribbean real estate. Instead, it's being used as an example of how quickly Shedeur Sanders has built influence beyond football. Every conversation about the property eventually leads back to a bigger question. Is this the beginning of a new blueprint for superstar athletes, or is Shedeur's path unique because of his family, his brand, and the opportunities that surrounded him from the start? Whatever the answer may be, one thing has become crystal clear. People aren't talking about this story simply because of a multi-million-dollar home. They're talking about what that home represents: a young quarterback entering the NFL with a level of financial independence, business experience, and public attention that few rookies have ever enjoyed. And as his career with the Browns unfolds, those conversations are only likely to grow louder because every success, every setback, and every major decision will now be viewed through the lens of a player who has already proven that football is only one part of a much bigger journey. When this story first surfaced, it looked like another headline about celebrity real estate. A breathtaking beachfront mansion in St. Croix, a price tag of more than $5 million, and Deion Sanders' name attached to it. It had all the ingredients for a story about luxury and success. But as more details emerged, it became clear that the property itself was never the most interesting part of the conversation. The real story was what the purchase appeared to reveal about Shedeur Sanders' approach to building his future. Instead of focusing solely on his NFL contract, Shedeur has reportedly spent years creating multiple streams of income through endorsements, licensing opportunities, and the strength of his personal brand. While football remains the foundation of his career, it no longer appears to be the only engine driving his financial success. That's a significant shift from the traditional path followed by many young athletes, who often wait until signing a major second contract before making large investments. Whether every report about his earnings proves perfectly accurate or not, there's little doubt that his business profile has grown into something far larger than most rookies ever experience. The reported partnership with his father on the St. Croix property reflects a broader philosophy that Coach Prime has promoted for years. Throughout his coaching career, Deion Sanders has consistently encouraged players to think beyond game day, emphasizing ownership, financial education, and creating wealth that lasts long after the final whistle. If this investment is indeed part of that long-term vision, then it represents more than a luxury purchase. It represents a lesson in planning ahead. Rather than spending money simply because it's available, the reported structure of the deal suggests a focus on building assets with lasting value.
Of course, none of this guarantees what will happen next. Shedeur still has to prove himself in one of the toughest leagues in professional sports. Every rookie quarterback faces enormous pressure, and success in business can never replace success on the football field. The endorsements, the investments, and the headlines may attract attention, but ultimately his legacy will be shaped by how he performs once the games begin. Fans will judge him by his leadership, his decision-making, and his ability to help his team win when the spotlight is brightest. At the same time, it's impossible to ignore how different his starting point appears to be. Long before completing a full NFL season, Shedeur Sanders has already become part of conversations that extend far beyond touchdowns and passing yards. He's being discussed as a businessman, a brand, and a young athlete whose financial strategy may influence how future prospects think about their own careers. Whether people admire that approach or remain skeptical of it, one thing is certain: it has changed the way many fans view what success in modern sports can look like. Perhaps that's the biggest takeaway from this entire story. The mansion may have captured the headlines, but it also served as a reminder that today's athletes are operating in a completely different era. Opportunities created through endorsements, licensing, social media, and personal branding can sometimes become just as valuable as the contracts signed with professional teams. Shedeur Sanders appears to have recognized that reality early, And if his football career develops alongside his business success, he could become one of the strongest examples of how the next generation of athletes builds lasting wealth. Only time will reveal how this journey unfolds. The Caribbean estate may eventually become just one chapter in a much larger story, one filled with NFL milestones, business ventures, and new opportunities that haven't even been imagined yet. For now, though, one thing is clear. The conversation was never really about a mansion. It was about a young quarterback who seems determined to build a legacy that stretches far beyond the football field. So now the question shifts to you. Do you think Shedeur Sanders is setting the blueprint for the next generation of athlete entrepreneurs? Or do you believe his path is unique because of the opportunities and guidance he's had from the very beginning? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want more in-depth stories covering the biggest developments around the Browns, Shedeur Sanders, and the NFL, be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one.